Good evening. It's Richard Lund coming to you from Los Angeles. I want to say that this stuff you see on the screen, the text, it's not it's not clickbait. It's really who I am. I've been listening to Vince Racaniello lately, and he's taught me a lot about viruses. Now, he's a firm believer in evolution all the way through, start to finish, the whole life. I mean, the whole natural world, everything. And I was originally taught what I knew about biology in college by Dr. George Howe. I would like to dedicate this video to George Howe because of what he taught me and the foundation he laid in my life. And he believed in evolution, but he also was a recent creationist. So that would be, in today's world, somebody who believes in flat Earth or something like that. But he taught me how to think. He taught me that he did real research. I mean, this is the guy that would go out and plot where plants grew, and he studied the chaparral environment near where our college was, and he really did real primary research on wild type and the ones that were deviating from wild type, and after the fires, because that particular part of the world where we live burns every 40 years on average, and that affects the way plants grow. He was a botanist. I'm just saying he did real, primary research, and he published. Now, did he get published in Nature? Did he get published in PNAS? Did he get published in the prestigious journals? Nope, because he was, in the minds of others, a Looney Tune. Not really a Looney Tune, but I mean, he wouldn't be regarded highly at all by most people in science because he had this belief that God created the world and the things in it and people and so forth. Well, that's where I am. That's, I think, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's what I accept as a Christian. But I want people to understand that it's Earth Day. Okay, 50 years ago, I remember going over to William S. Hart Park in Newhall and finding out about this funny idea called Earth Day. In those days, we heard people talking about ecology. They didn't talk about saving the planet or stuff like that, or climate change. They just talked about taking care of the planet, making sure that things that were here would still be here later on for the next generation. That sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing to think about. And especially lately, as I've been listening to Vince Racaniello talk about, especially as he's been teaching about viruses and how they continually mutate every single time they replicate, it's important to understand that we who observe the world, if we're talking about science, are evolutionists. As we observe it, we see change. We're not denying that, and that's something that I've heard Vince disparage our present vice president because he doesn't believe in evolution, according to Vince. Well, if you talk to me, if you said you believe in evolution, I'd say yes and no. Yes, do I believe it's happening? Yes, do I see it happening in the world? Yes, I do. Those changes, have they generated all of the structures and all of the creation that we see, all of the complexity? And the more and more I spend time with biochemistry, the more and more I feel, wow, this is really complicated stuff. And, I'm just saying, please teach me over time what your mechanism of action is, how it works, how do we get this complete complexity encouraging from zero to everything, Well, I'm sure people are trying maybe to teach people that, but I think of Robert Sapolsky up in the Bay Area. I forgot what university he's with, maybe Stanford. He takes people that believe God created the world seriously, which is kind of cool. I remember one time I was at CBS News in New York. We were working on a project, and it was before the broadcast for the evening, and Bob Schieffer was the guy that had the big desk in those days. And he just could not understand how Americans, who, fellow citizens, could believe in creation, could believe that God created the world. He could not understand it. And I think in today's world, we benefit by learning to understand each other, by learning to understand what our thoughts are and how we conceive of the world and how we put it all together. So in thinking about Earth Day 50 years ago, which was kind of a casual time, a time to think about interesting ideas, it was just after, in California where I lived, it was just after kind of the hippie movement had hit its peak and was dying down. And there were people who had, left the cities and gone out to become farmers, learn how plants grow and learn in a natural world, and maybe even have, communes. That was a cool idea in those days. And yet, it didn't pan out forever. Some of those people probably continued in farming, which is good. We need farmers. Heavens to bet, we need farmers. But there's other things to think about. And, I really treasure Vince's ideas because, he's playing it straightforwardly. He's trying to say, hey, we got to pay attention. And he's got one section of his teaching on emerging viruses. And I believe that he's granted Creative Commons attribution for this. So I'm going to play a little bit of it when I can here. And I hope that you will understand that's what he's talking about. He's saying that these changes are happening in our world, especially lately, especially over the last few hundred years perhaps, and it's affecting everything, sometimes to good, sometimes not too good. And especially if we're talking about viruses, which he explains that viruses are, every single organism that exists has viruses in it. and the bats happen to be a place where viruses can reside. They're a mammal. They fly around. They travel. But we're mammals. we fly around. We travel. Anyway, so I have been meandering in my brain here, but I just, again, just want to dedicate it to George Howe, and a big thank you to Vince Racaniello for teaching me, a guy that believes God created the world and the stuff in it, that there's really a lot to evolution, and it's important to study it because we got a lot to learn there, and I got a lot to learn from Vincent and appreciate him. So let's see if I can do this. We've got, this is his talking about, you can see the graph here. You have that steep red line that suddenly goes up. I mean, if you look at the year 1500, it's starting to increase. You get into 1800, and suddenly our population is really skyrocketing. And that's important to think about. Now, we'll go back to the idea that I'm a Christian. I believe that God, created the world and so forth. And so I have noticed that on the media that we're dealing with, social media, if someone says, "Oh, I'm a Christian," or I'm a Buddhist, or I'm a Jewish person, or I'm a Muslim, or whatever and then in looking at trying to understand them, and often people will say, "Oh, I'm going to give that person credibility because they identify with my tribe, my little group." So, if I said, "Well, I'm a Baptist," I was watching something the other day, and that was put on by folks that were apparently Baptist, and they were interviewing someone, and they said, "Oh, are you a Baptist?" And the person said, "No, I'm a Presbyterian." Oh, okay. Well, that puts them just slightly in the camp of I'm going to be afraid of what he's thinking. Now, I don't know Vincent personally. I wish I did. It'd be nice to know him someday. And so let's imagine he's a guy that teaches at Columbia University. Perhaps he is an agnostic or an atheist, or maybe he's a Lutheran. Who knows? I'm not trying to identify. I'm just saying we often in our world we take people who identify with something that we identify with, whether it's a Christian faith or whether it's somebody who likes the Democratic Party or hates the Democratic Party or loves Trump or hates Trump or whatever, and then we kind of connect up the dots and saying, well, if that person is saying this, then I'm going to believe him about this other subject. That's a problem because some people are putting out stuff that's, quite frankly, nutty. It doesn't make sense. And I think we've got to really tamp that down, and we have to start understanding and learning from each other as we listen. And when somebody is really going off the rails, I think it's time to put big question marks what they're saying. So we've got the population. So if I was saying to a Roman Catholic, well, you believe in unlimited population growth, but of course they don't really believe that as a church. They have a policy that says you shouldn't do things to artificially stop pregnancy, but natural child, what they call it, child planning, or natural birth planning, not birth control, but birth planning is okay with those folks, as I understand it. So we're going to give them some room to maneuver and learn, but we're also going to say that as we continue to get more and more people, what happens to the rest of the world? And one of the things he points out very clearly, and I think we have to really pay attention to Vince here, is that as we move through this, well, I'll just let him explain. Here we go.
Biggest overriding factor that drives the emergence of infectious diseases, not just of us, but of animals as well, is human population growth, as evidenced by this amazing graphic where it's just shot into the billions quite recently. And, of course, accompanying this population growth, amazing change occurring in all ecosystems as we inhabit every corner of the planet, and we introduce changes that alter the ecology. We'll talk more about ecological issues next time, and we make encounters with viruses more and more frequent. And these are some of the ecological and anthropogenic activities that promote virus emergence. Another way to say this is humans continuously devise new ways to encounter viruses. From our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they lived in very small groups of 100 or 200 people that moved around when the food ran out. They encountered some wildlife and got perhaps infections from them, to now we have amazing global travel networks. This is a website where you can see all the airplanes in the air at any given time. A virus can go around the world very quickly. We also do other things that increase our ability to become infected with viruses that were...
Well, I'm going to jump back in. And please understand that, I'm not trying to take from him that his intellectual property that he's created. I want you to go and listen to his series that he presents. So Vincent Racaniello, and I'll try to put a link in the show notes when I can, so you can go ahead and listen to this for yourself. But you got to understand that as we crowd more and more people, we have to have a place for them. We have to have them do agriculture. We have to have them raise animals and so forth. And so what is the outcome of that? It's the crowding together of the animals that are left, the wild animals that are left, like bats. and so when they do that, then we're going to have that opportunity for their viruses to infect each other at the same time. And when we have two similar viruses causing an infection in a bat, that has been explained by Ralph Baric, and I made mention to him in another video, of him in another video, that we're getting that to where we have an opportunity for those bats to have their own little biological lab, and they don't have a safety shield on them. They are just having these viruses swap parts. They call that recombination, and that produces viruses that are new and we haven't seen before, and viruses like SARS-CoV-2. And so, are we going to have more emerging viruses this century? The answer is yes, we are, because we've continued to crowd the animals together. Now, there's another. Let's see if I can find toward the end of this piece. Well, so here we have another view of various coronaviruses that are in nature, and we have a number. He's listed 8 of them here, 7 of which infect humans. One of which, if you look down toward the bottom, is the SARS. Actually, it's SADS. It's severe acute diarrhea syndrome, and it has a number there. That's in pigs, and that may at some point move to us. If you look back to, there's some others. It goes from a mouse to a cow to us. So farm animals are part of the ecological system that we are talking about. And so farm animals are what we have to deal with. And this gets to, where you're dealing with people who want to suggest that we eat vegan or that we eat vegetarian. Because as we have large concentrations of farm animals, and if they also are near large concentrations of wild animals like bats that might cross-infect into those farm animals, a lot of flu viruses, live in birds. So chickens are a natural reservoir of influenza viruses, and sometimes they get into people. Sometimes they cross that zoonotic barrier, that's called. So the important thing to consider for the future is planning. How are we going to do the planning for the future? I remember many years ago there was a man in Minnesota where I lived at the time who was a professor up at the University of Minnesota and who suggested that we change the way we lay out our world, in Minnesota anyway, and basically put in rows of apartments that goes on kind of a grid basis. So about a mile long of an apartment building, and then another mile to the right or left. And so in the middle, then we would have green spaces where we could grow things and do things that would be natural. So it would be less density of people, which I suppose, at the time, it was just somebody coming up with some interesting ideas. The transportation hub would be on the roof of everything, so it would be floating around. And I can't remember the fellow's name, and I'm sure that he's long forgotten in the dustbin of history. But just if you think about it, is we have to be careful as we continue to expand our population density that we don't mess up. Here if we're going to have large groups of animals that we eat, we're raising for food, and then we also have pushed together, mosquitoes or tsetse flies or, bats or some other place where there's a reservoir of viruses that continually become more concentrated, it's going to spill over. And so we're going to have more problems down the road. So this is just something to think about on Earth Day from a person who says, I believe in creation and I also believe in evolution. And I'm not trying to cross ideas there. I'm just saying we can see it happening. We don't have to be blind to it. And whether or not it explains all of the origins of everything around us is another question. We can have that discussion. But we need to recognize that the density of our world population does affect human health, does affect our ability to go forward and be successful people groups around the world. And we're going to see over the next year or two some terrible outcomes here and there, maybe in many places around the world where people don't have access to good health care, don't have access to doctors, don't have access to hospitals and ventilators, and perhaps are going to have tremendous death through this COVID-19. And, I guess I've been selfish thinking about, how my family will be, how my mother will be, how I will be, my wife and, my own children and their children. And of course, we also need to think about others. And so I would encourage you as you go forward in life to think about the world and think about scientific research, because we need to fund people to do basic research to find out what's happening around the world with viruses and other things, other potential things that could hurt people. And then we need to think about developing drugs and vaccines. Now, that's a code word for some people that are just going to be going, oh, he believes in vaccines, so we're not going to listen to this guy. Tough pounce, I think I'm thankful for having the polio vaccine. I'm thankful for having smallpox vaccine. I didn't have to go into an iron lung because I didn't get complications from polio. I didn't have to wear leg braces like that cute little girl in my third grade class who had to have crutches and leg braces on her body and have to use those for the rest of her life. That's what polio was to me. That's what, that was a bizarre and scary disease. Now, some people are going to say, well, the Gates vaccine or the Sabin vaccine or whatever, yes, is inexpensive, but it, hurts people, gives them neuromuscular problems. Maybe one out of person every 300,000 gets vaccinated. But they forget that the others are not getting polio and not having these other problems. Imagine you living in a Bangladesh or a place where there's severe poverty, getting polio, not even be able to plug in your radio to an electrical source, much less an iron lung, much less some kind of ventilator, some kind of CPAP or BiPAP machine, because your lungs are so weak you can't breathe because your brain doesn't know how to tell your lungs because you have a lot of damage. I mean, these are the things that I care about. I may be just rambling, but just, again, thanks to Vincent Racaniello, for reminding me of the truth of evolution and what it matters and how viruses evolve, because it's going to matter to our world. And, I think there's a whole lot of things that we've thought about over the last month or so as we've all been home, or not all of us. Some of us had to work because they were essential, but many of us have been quietly, in a place at home mostly. And let's not forget the lessons. Let's not forget what we've considered to be important. It isn't just about NASCAR, although I'm sure it's a lot of fun. It's not just about having your baseball team win the World Series, although that's thrilling, I'm sure. It's not just about going to the beach. It's not just about taking your next cruise vacation if you're an old guy like me, which is wonderful. I'm looking forward to going to Alaska with my wife at sometime soon to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary. But it's about what we have to do as people to make our world reasonable and to eat food that's sustainable, that doesn't hurt us. We don't need sugar. We can have it, a few times a month, maybe, small amounts, but we got to get away from processed food. We got to get away from food that can be just, opened up and put in the microwave and eaten, and yet it destroys our bodies. We also got to think about, do we really have to have blueberries, that are grown in Chile, flown in for us just because we can buy them? Or maybe we should, buy the ones from Oregon and freeze them and eat those instead. Or maybe we buy fruit locally. What grows around me? Well, it's citrus, avocados, things like that. So I've been eating those. So anyway, again, I lost my original ending, but I just wanted to tell you, first of all, thank you for listening. I want you to stay well, stay safe, and please keep your distance. Good night.